Hey everyone, welcome back to Billionaire. Today we are going to do while loops in our fourth episode of this Python Essentials course. And if you remember back from last episode, we were talking about for loops and why we use them. So just a quick refresher, for loops are used to loop through a statement of code or multiple statements of code with a finite range or finite series of steps. For example, if we did the command for I in range of 10, essentially we're specifying 10 steps or 10 loop throughs of whatever we put inside this for loop. So let's say we just put in the code statement print I. We're going to be printing I 10 times. And the way this works is it's going to print out the numbers from 0 all the way to 9. So unless you specify otherwise, this range command will always start at the number 0 and it'll go all the way up to 1 less than the number you specified within the parentheses. So for example, this command will start at 0 and it'll increment or go up with every single step, and it'll go all the way up to 9, which is 1 less than the number 10, which we put inside of our parentheses. So that's sort of how for loops work. We're basically, printing I 10 times, and since it starts at 0, it's going to end at the number 9. And that was a quick refresher of kind of what we learned in last episode. So in this episode, we're going to take a little bit of a change, and we're going to look at while loops. And we're going to discuss, why we use them and how they're different from the for loop. So yeah, let's get right into it. So while loops are kind of unique in that they don't have a finite range of steps you kind of loop through. And I'll show you what that means in just a second with a quick example. So before we get into the example, I want to sort of explain what while loops use as an input. So if you remember back from maybe a couple episodes ago, we were talking about data types, and one of the data types was a Boolean. And basically, a Boolean is a data type that amounts to either true or false. So if anything results in a true or a false output, we call that a Boolean. We call that true or false, data type a Boolean. And so while loops, they use a Boolean data type to sort of determine when to start and stop. Let's say we have a variable called stop, and we're going to set it to false. So right now, stop is a Boolean since it's set to false, which is a Boolean data type. So right now, we have this variable called stop, and it's set to false. Now we're going to use that stop variable and sort of input it into the while loop. So let's say we have a while loop. So let's say while stop is not equal to true. Make that capital. So while stop is not equal to true, we're going to do something. And since stop is set to false right now, this while loop will keep running until stop eventually changes to true. And if we don't change stop to true ever in the code, this while loop will go on forever. So somewhere in this code, we want to change stop to true so that the while loop eventually terminates. Because otherwise we're going to have an infinite loop. And we don't want that, right? So let's go ahead and write some simple code. So we're going to, let's say we're going to print hi, right? And if I just ran this right now, this program would print hi infinitely since we're not changing stop to true. So since stop is always false, it's going to never equal true, which means that we're going to print hi infinitely. And so to counter that, we want to indicate somewhere in this while loop that we want to change stop to true eventually. And maybe one way we do that is with a counter. So we're going to say print hi, and every time we print hi, right under that, we're going to increase our counter. So let's go ahead and define our counter first. So let's say up here, right, count equals 0. Let me get rid of that. And every time we print hi, we're going to increase our count by 1. So we print hi, then count goes up by 1. We print hi again, count goes up by 1 more, and so on and so forth. So this is going to keep printing hi and keep adding 1 to our count variable until the while loop stops. So again, if I pressed run right now, this would infinitely print high and infinitely keep adding 1 to the count variable. And of course, we don't want this to be infinite, so we're going to add in a quick 2 lines of code to make that stop. So we're going to say if count equals 10. So if count ever becomes 10, we are going to set stop to true. So what this program should do is it's going to print high, and it's going to add 1 to count. And it's going to keep adding 1 to count until count equals 10. Once count equals 10, it's going to turn stop from false into true. And when stop becomes true, the while loop will terminate, because the while loop is conditional, right? The while loop will only work if stop is not equal to true. But the minute we set stop equal to true, that's when the while loop will stop running and the program will terminate. So let's go ahead and try this, right? So we should be printing out high. As you can see, we've printed out high 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let me count that. I think I skipped a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So just like we wanted, we printed out high 10 times. So for every high we print out, the count goes up by 1. So when we print out 10 highs, that means the count is equal to 10. And since the count equaled 10, our stop variable became true, and the while loop eventually stopped printing out highs. And so, as you can see, this is different from the for loop because we're not really specifying a range. We're just telling it to keep on printing high and keep on increasing the counter until we reach a certain value where we want the while loop to stop. So if you want to loop through something and you don't have a finite range that you want to loop through, while loops are great because they allow you to sort of conditionally loop through things. As long as the condition is true, you're allowed to use the while loop, and when the condition becomes false, it stops. So while loops are a great way to conditionally print lines of code repeatedly until the condition is not met. And so that's sort of why we use while loops in code and how they're different from the original for loop that we talked about in the previous episode. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense. Hopefully you were able to learn something here today. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment down below. And stay tuned for our next episode when we'll talk about some other topics in Python. And thank you all for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Stay tuned, Billionaires.